So I mean, did you have to pinch yourselves like these boys from Yorkshire in Times Square? Like, I know there's like in the UK again, some context. There's kind of like a psychological hierarchy of like London being or the southeast being the epicenter of the UK, and where the design agencies seem to or the big businesses seem to congregate. Like, was there? Did you ever have that feeling? And then you've got obviously the class as well, working class kids working from the street. Did that ever really affect you in any particular way when you, or did you not even think you thought beyond that?
I think if I go back to those train or driving down to London on a recce, and it was Simon, my partner, who's a real, you know, he's a working class northern guy. At the point we were doing that, what's really interesting is it was just after a recession around about '93,
Yeah.
and that was almost the death of the yuppie. It was like, you know, this the '80s success that everybody was experiencing both sides of the Atlantic. It just kind of fell down. So when you have a northern agency coming into London and they say, do you want to do lunch? And you say, no, we're not doing lunch because you'll end up paying for it, and we need to get back up north and do this work. Actually, if I'm honest, it was very refreshing at the time in London for many organisations to hear that. So rather than it being like a second division town or, you know, like a below the London halo, it actually felt like, wow, it's good to work with these guys because, you know, we're going to get the job done. There's going to be no wastage, if you like, or time wastage, or spending money in other areas. And I think just that kind of like, you know, we're outsiders. We're not from London. So, you know, I think that at the time, maybe people were looking for new ways to work.
Yeah.
And by luck, or by just being ourselves and being authentic and real, it played in our favour, I would say.
So I'm curious about, say, like how you scaled your business as well, because it's obviously, like, in retrospect, you understand like how management and like you're designing design, and then you're actually designing careers, and then designing a business. But if you don't actually have someone to sit there and like explain all those things out to you, I mean, how did you go about first as a designer being able to allow other designers to create for you, and like giving away that freedom, and then managing that? I mean, was that like a peaceful transition, or was that kind of trial and error?
There was definitely a lot of trial and error. We had a couple of like quote non-exec directors who came in and kind of, you know, sat around for half a day and went.
Okay.
But I mean, really, it was more about, you know, there was a level of rinse and repeat. So if it worked in London, we'd build a little studio there. We'd get up to 10, 15, 20 people. We'd replicate that in New York. Same model. It had to stand on its own feet. It would not be funded by London or by our Yorkshire office in Huddersfield. Then we did the same in San Francisco. Then we did the same in Sydney in Australia. Then we did the same in LA. So each time there was a level of take what we just did, improve that. What could we do at the next city? By the way, you know, we were fairly primitive in terms of let's go to a place that feels cool, speaks English, nice weather. You know, so like there wasn't much strategic thinking going on there. But in terms of the operational side and looking at the potential pool of clients, I think we threw the dart at some really interesting cities, and really just tried to sort of like build on what we'd already done in the previous office or previous offices, studios, and see. And then once that was, you know, we at one point we were up to like maybe 250 employees, and we turned around and we thought, wow, and we're still an independent. That was the risk. We were project based.
Yeah.
We had zero retainers, and we were not part of a you know, strong arm of a network. We were really project to project. So there was a huge risk attached to that eventually, you know, hit us hard. But you know, in the growing phase of that, I think we were careful, we were strategic, but there was no 5-year plan. It tended to be month to month.
What was the culture like during its peak?
Culturally for us, we would try and get all our officers, when I say all our members of our teams together annually, you know, wherever that could be. And the first one we held was in Stratford in England. Of course, you know, famous for Shakespeare and everything else. But so we have people flying in from New York, San Francisco, down from Huddersfield, up from London. And we all just came together in this kind of crazy historical town, beautiful town. And of course, like that was for our friends overseas, it was pretty mind blowing. For us, it was super educational, and we just, like any young organization, had a blast. So from that point on, we called it a Stratford Do. So we've had Stratford Do's in California, in Australia, in upstate New York,
Nice.
and we always kind of referred to it as our Stratford event. But bringing people together, I mean, we talk about that today, obviously, post-COVID, but we found that was the best way. It was expensive. It was costly because we weren't working, but the return on that investment in terms of culture, being part of a growing kind of like, a family, an agency, feeling connected, was huge return. So we invested in that, and we know organizations do that today, but the larger you get, the more difficult it becomes to kind of like make that happen. But for us, it was, and that's where we ideated over our next book. Our next, went from 50 pages to the next one was 200 pages to 500 pages. So the noise book of bringing designers from around the world was still happening. So we were still publishing our sort of kind of self-published experimental books as well.
Yeah, I mean, this is I mean, on paper, this is like a textbook design career, right? Like you start with sidewalk chalk, you then start an agency in your grandma's house, and then you launch a global agency that's successful in multiple cities. Like this is, it's very awesome. It's very inspirational of like how you were able to build and how you were able to grow and get people excited about your overarching mission. I guess.